I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 28 years old, living what seemed like a perfectly normal life in Boston. My graphic design career was thriving, my apartment cozy, my life orderly, until that night. At 2 a.m., violent knocking shattered my sleep. Opening the door, I found my sister Haley collapsed, barely breathing. As I pulled her inside, my phone buzzed. Mom's text made my blood freeze. "Don't help that cripple." She made her choice. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about family loyalty was thrown into question. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever had to choose between family expectations and doing what's right in your heart. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My parents, Sandra and William Mitchell, maintained an immaculate home in an excellent school district. Dad was a respected corporate attorney, Mom a pediatric nurse who quit working to raise us properly. They hosted dinner parties where guests marveled at our family's accomplishments, especially mine. From an early age, I was the perfect child. Straight A's, debate team captain, accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship. My parents beamed with pride at every award ceremony, every recognition. Cassandra knows how to apply herself, they'd tell anyone who would listen. Then there was Haley, for years younger than me. Where I was methodical and organized, Haley was spontaneous and creative. Her room was a riot of art supplies, her schedule fluid rather than structured. She had this infectious laugh that could fill our entire house. When we were younger, I adored her free spirit. We were different but complementary. I helped her study for tests. She taught me to see beauty in unexpected places. But our parents never saw Haley's gifts the way I did. Where they praised my academic achievements, they criticized her B grades as not living up to potential. Her artwork was a nice hobby, but not practical. Every parent-teacher conference became an opportunity to remind Haley how she failed to measure up to her older sister. "Why can't you be more like Cassandra?" became the refrain of Haley's childhood. I didn't realize how damaging this was until later. As a teenager, I sometimes even enjoyed the favoritism, the golden child status. It's uncomfortable to admit that now, but it's the truth. I didn't understand the toll it was taking on my sister, how the constant comparisons were eroding her self-worth. Everything changed when Haley was 19. She was driving home from community college when another driver ran a red light and T-boned her car. The injuries weren't visibly catastrophic, no broken spine, no paralysis, but the aftermath was insidious. Haley developed chronic pain syndrome, particularly in her back and legs. Some days were manageable, others left her unable to get out of bed. My parents' response was immediate disbelief. "You're fine, stop being dramatic," Mom would say when Haley couldn't attend family functions. "This is just another way to get attention," Dad commented when Haley had to drop classes because sitting through lectures became unbearable. I witnessed their dismissal, but didn't fight hard enough against it. I'd offer weak defenses, maybe she really is hurting, but would back down when my parents unleashed their counterarguments. They were so convinced, so authoritative in their certainty that Haley was exaggerating. Mom, despite being a former nurse, was the worst. "I know what real pain looks like," she'd declare, as if pain were only legitimate when visible like a broken bone or a bleeding wound. After a while, they stopped taking Haley to specialists when the diagnoses confirmed her chronic pain condition. Doctor shopping, they called it, convinced Haley was manipulating medical professionals to validate her supposed disability. They refused to help her apply for disability benefits, calling it giving up on life before it even starts. When I graduated college and landed my first graphic design job in Boston 3 years ago, I felt both excitement and guilt. I was escaping the growing tension at home, the daily battles over Haley's health. I promised to stay in touch, to visit often. But life got busy, visits became less frequent, and our once close relationship dwindled to occasional texts and monthly calls. The distance made it easier to believe what my parents told me, that Haley was improving but choosing to remain dependent. That she could work if she really wanted to. That their tough love approach was necessary to prevent her from settling into victimhood. I knew Haley was still living with our parents, unable to sustain employment long enough to support herself independently. I knew she had been denied disability benefits twice, largely because our parents refused to provide supporting documentation or transportation to evaluations. I knew she was isolated, with former friends moving on with their lives while hers remained stagnant. What I didn't know, what I chose not to see, was how much worse things had become. Looking back, there were signs in our conversations: Haley's increasing reluctance to discuss her daily life, her vague responses when I asked about her medical care, the way her voice would drop to a whisper when our parents were nearby. I hadn't seen Haley in person for almost a year before she appeared at my door that night. The last time we were together was at Thanksgiving, where she barely ate and excused herself repeatedly to stretch her legs in private. I noticed she'd lost weight, but when I mentioned it, Mom quickly interrupted to say Haley was finally taking care of herself and not using food for comfort anymore. I accepted this explanation because it was easier than the alternative, that something was seriously wrong and I was doing nothing to help. That night, as I stared at my sister's collapsed form in my doorway, I realized how badly I had failed her. Wednesday night had been like any other. I was working late on a rebrand project for a major client, the kind of assignment that could elevate my standing at the design agency. My apartment was quiet except for the occasional click of my mouse and the ambient music playing softly through my speakers. Boston city lights twinkled outside my window as the night deepened. By 1 a.m., my eyes were burning from staring at the screen. I finally closed my laptop, stretched my stiff shoulders, and shuffled through my nighttime routine. Teeth brushed, face washed, I collapsed into bed just before 1:30, setting my alarm for 7 a.m. Sleep came quickly. The pounding jolted me awake. Disoriented, I thought it was part of a dream until it came again, urgent, desperate knocking that made my apartment door rattle in its frame. My bedside clock read 2:07 a.m. My heart raced as I sat up. Living alone as a woman in the city, late-night visitors triggered immediate alarm bells. I considered calling the building security or even 911, but something about the frantic rhythm of the knocking stopped me. It didn't sound threatening, it sounded desperate. Cautiously, I approached my door and peered through the peephole. The hallway light illuminated a hunched figure I barely recognized at first. Then she looked up, and despite the distortion of the glass, I knew those eyes. "Haley?" I called, quickly undoing the deadbolt and chain. When I opened the door, my sister was clinging to the wall for support, her body seemingly unable to hold itself upright. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken and glassy with fever. Her normally auburn hair hung limp and unwashed around her shoulders. She wore mismatched clothes, sweatpants too large for her frame, a thin jacket inappropriate for the October chill, and one regular sneaker paired with what looked like a medical walking shoe. "Cass," she whispered, her voice raspy. I didn't know where else. Before she could finish, her knees buckled. I lunged forward, catching her before she hit the floor. She was alarmingly light, bones pressing against my hands as I supported her weight. The heat radiating from her body, even through her clothes, signaled a significant fever. "Jesus, Haley, what happened to you?" I maneuvered her inside, kicking the door closed behind us. "How did you even get here?" Her breathing was labored as I helped her to my couch. "Bus," she managed. "Then, taxi. Use the emergency card you gave me last year." I had almost forgotten about that, a prepaid credit card with $300 I'd given her for emergencies when I realized our parents had taken control of her regular bank account. The fact that she'd saved it all this time, only to use it to flee to me, made my stomach clench with guilt. "They won't let me get better," she murmured, her eyes struggling to focus on me. Had to escape, before it was too late. A small backpack hung from her shoulder, which I gently removed. Inside were minimal belongings, a change of underwear, a toothbrush, her ID, and several prescription bottles. I picked up one of the bottles, trying to make sense of the medication name I didn't recognize. "Haley, these aren't your usual meds," I said, examining the label. I think this is an antipsychotic." Her eyes filled with tears. They tell the doctors I'm crazy, that I make up the pain. Mom crushes pills into my food when she thinks I don't notice. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced down to see a text from my mother, and the words knocked the air from my lungs. If that ungrateful girl showed up at your place, don't help that cripple. She made her choice. Send her back or we'll hold you responsible too. As I stared at the message in disbelief, more texts followed. She's manipulating you. Always has. Your sister needs psychological help, not coddling. We've sacrificed everything for her, and this is how she repays us. Don't throw away your relationship with us for her delusions. My hands shook as I set the phone down. Everything I thought I knew about my family was crumbling. All those years of believing my parents were strict but loving, that they wanted what was best for both of us despite their flawed approach, it all seemed like a carefully constructed lie. Haley's eyes had closed, her breathing becoming more shallow. When I touched her forehead, it burned against my palm. She murmured something incoherent, her body occasionally twitching. Haley? Haley, can you hear me? I gently shook her shoulder, but got no response. For a brief, terrible moment, I found myself considering my mother's words. Was Haley manipulating me? Was this some elaborate performance to gain sympathy? The thought made me sick as soon as it formed. This was my sister, clearly suffering, possibly dying on my couch. And I was still giving our parents the benefit of the doubt. When Haley's breathing became increasingly labored and she wouldn't respond to my voice, I made my decision. I picked up my phone, ignored the 3 new messages from my mother, and dialed 911. I need an ambulance, I told the operator, my voice steadier than I felt. My sister is unresponsive with a high fever. She may have been given medication that wasn't prescribed for her condition. As I gave them my address and answered their questions, I watched Haley's chest rise and fall with each difficult breath. I had spent years trusting the wrong people. I wouldn't make that mistake again. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficiency both reassuring and terrifying. They asked rapid-fire questions I struggled to answer. What medications was she taking? Did she have any allergies? When did her symptoms begin? The gaps in my knowledge about my own sister's medical history felt like indictments. BP is 90/50, pulse 120 and 30, temp 103.8. One paramedic called to the other as they worked. The concern in their voices was evident even through their professional demeanor. "Ma'am, we need to transport her immediately," the female paramedic told me as they transferred Haley to a stretcher. "Will you be riding with us or following?" "I'm coming with her," I said, grabbing my purse and keys. I wouldn't let Haley out of my sight again. In the ambulance, I held Haley's limp hand while the paramedics inserted in 4 and attached monitoring equipment. The wail of the siren above us seemed to punctuate the gravity of the situation. "Has she been sick long?" the paramedic asked as he checked Haley's pupils. I don't know," I admitted, shame washing over me. "We haven't seen each other in person for almost a year. She lives with our parents in Chicago. I didn't know she was coming until she showed up tonight." The paramedic's expression remained neutral, but I felt judged nonetheless. What kind of sister doesn't know if her sibling has been ill? Massachusetts General Hospital's emergency department was a blur of activity. Haley was immediately wheeled away behind double doors while I was directed to a waiting area and given clipboard after clipboard of forms to fill out. I left most fields blank, realizing how little I knew about Haley's current medical situation. The waiting room was purgatory. Every time the doors opened, I looked up expectantly, only to see someone else's name being called. My phone continued to buzz with messages from my parents, growing increasingly threatening. "We're calling the police to report Haley missing. Your father is contacting his attorney friend. You have no idea what you're getting involved in." I silenced my phone and slipped it into my pocket. 3 hours into waiting, exhaustion and anxiety collided. I found myself staring at a children's show playing on the waiting room TV, memories flooding back unbidden. Haley at 6, showing me a drawing she'd made of our family, stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Mom taping my straight-A report card to the refrigerator, while Haley's B-average report disappeared into a drawer. Haley crying after her middle school art show, where our parents had shown up late and left early. Me at my high school graduation, the center of attention, while Haley quietly took photos from the sidelines. The gradual dimming of the light in my sister's eyes as year after year, she was deemed less worthy of attention, of love. Ms. Mitchell. I startled at the sound of my name. A doctor in blue scrubs stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. I'm Dr. Evans. Your sister has been stabilized, but I need to speak with you about her condition. He led me to a small consultation room and closed the door before sitting across from me. His expression was grave. Ms. Mitchell, your sister is seriously ill. She's severely malnourished and dehydrated, with a BMI that indicates prolonged nutritional deficiency. She has an untreated urinary tract infection that has likely progressed to her kidneys, which is causing the high fever. We've started her on 4 antibiotics and fluids. I nodded numbly, trying to process the information. What's most concerning, he continued, are the results of her initial blood work. We've found several medications in her system that wouldn't be indicated for her chronic pain condition. In fact, some of them could potentially worsen her symptoms or mask important warning signs. What medications? I asked, my voice barely audible. We found traces of Haldol, which is a powerful antipsychotic, as well as several sedatives. There's also evidence she's been given tricyclic antidepressants in doses that would be considered excessive for pain management. The room seemed to tilt slightly. She told me our mother was putting medication in her food. I found prescription bottles in her bag. Dr. Evans's expression darkened. Ms. Mitchell, I need to be direct with you. What you're describing, combined with your sister's physical condition, raises serious concerns about potential medical abuse. Has your sister been under someone else's care? Someone who would have control over her medication? Our parents, I whispered. She's been living with them since her accident 4 years ago. They're the ones who manage her medical care. The doctor made a note on his clipboard. I'm going to have to report this to the appropriate authorities. In cases like this, we're mandatory reporters. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A woman in plain clothes entered, showing a badge. I'm Officer Ramirez. The nurse called us about a potential abuse situation. The next hour was a nightmare of statements and questions. I showed Officer Ramirez the text messages from my mother, explained what little I knew about Haley's living situation, and admitted my own absence from her life. Each admission felt like tearing open a wound. Has your sister ever mentioned abuse before tonight? Officer Ramirez asked. Not directly, I said, shame burning my cheeks. She would say things like, Mom and Dad don't believe me, or they think I'm making it up for attention. I thought they were being stubborn or old-fashioned about invisible disabilities. I never imagined they were actually. I couldn't finish the sentence. My phone, which I had placed on the table, lit up with an incoming call from Dad. Officer Ramirez noticed. You can answer if you want. It might be helpful to hear what they have to say now. With shaking hands, I put the phone on speaker. Cassandra Elizabeth Mitchell, my father's voice boomed, using my full name as he did when I was in trouble as a child. What the hell do you think you're doing? Dad, Haley is in the hospital. She's very sick. Of course she is, he scoffed. She's always sick when it gets her what she wants. I thought you were smarter than this. The doctors found medications in her system that could have killed her, I said, my voice gaining strength from the officer's presence. Medications she shouldn't have been taking. There was a pause before he spoke again, his tone lowered but more menacing. You're interfering in things you don't understand. Your mother and I have been dealing with Haley's mental health issues for years. Those medications were prescribed by professionals. For what condition, Dad? Because they're not appropriate for chronic pain. That's between her doctors and us. We're her legal caregivers. You're just stirring up trouble, and I promise you'll regret it. We've already spoken to Stanley. Stanley was his friend, a partner at a prestigious law firm. He says we have grounds to sue for interference and defamation if you continue with these wild accusations. Officer Ramirez signaled for me to keep him talking. Why did Mom tell me not to help Haley? Why did she call her a cripple? I asked. Another pause. Your mother was upset. Haley stole money from us before running away. She's been increasingly paranoid, making up stories about us poisoning her. It's part of her delusions. So Mom didn't text me saying not to help that cripple? A longer pause. I'm sure that's not exactly what was said. You're twisting things, just like your sister. Officer Ramirez motioned for me to wrap up the call. Dad, I can't talk anymore right now. I'm staying with Haley. Cassandra, listen to me very carefully. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. If you choose her over your family, there will be consequences. Your job, your reputation, everything you've worked for, we can make it all disappear. Think very carefully about whose side you're on. The call ended, and I looked up at Officer Ramirez, whose expression had hardened. That was illuminating, she said, making notes. We'll need a copy of those text messages, and I'd like you to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement. After the officer left, a social worker named Maya came to speak with me. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Your sister has been trying to leave your parents' home for months, she explained, reviewing notes on her tablet. According to the initial interview our colleague conducted while you were speaking with the police, Haley has reached out to several domestic violence shelters in Chicago, but was turned away because she needed medical care they couldn't provide. Why didn't she call me? I asked, voice breaking. She says she tried once, about 3 months ago. Your mother intercepted the call and punished her by taking away her phone for weeks. Each new revelation was a knife twisting deeper. Maya explained that the medical evidence strongly suggested systematic neglect and possibly intentional harm through inappropriate medication. There would likely be a criminal investigation, and Haley would need a safe place to recover once she was discharged. Can I see her? I asked after absorbing as much as I could. Maya led me to Haley's room in the general medical ward. My sister looked tiny in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and 4 bags. Her arms, now exposed in the hospital gown, showed the unmistakable signs of someone who had lost weight too rapidly, skin slightly loose around once fuller limbs, faint stretch marks indicating previous better nourishment. Her eyes fluttered open as I approached the bed. Cass, she whispered, her voice raspy. You're still here? Of course I am, I said, carefully taking her hand, mindful of the 4. I'm not going anywhere. A tear slipped down her cheek. Thank you for believing me, she whispered. No one else did. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead gently against hers. I believe you now, and I'm so sorry it took me this long. I promise, Haley, I won't let anyone hurt you again. Her fingers tightened weakly around mine, a ghost of the strong grip she once had. In that moment, I made a silent vow to protect my sister, regardless of the consequences my father had threatened. Some things were worth losing everything for. Morning came with harsh fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of Haley's monitors. I had dozed off in the visitor's chair, my neck stiff and my mouth dry. A nurse was checking Haley's vitals, moving efficiently but gently to avoid waking her. How is she? I whispered. Fever's down to 101, the nurse replied quietly. Doctor will be by on rounds in about an hour. I nodded my thanks, stretching to ease my cramped muscles. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 29 text messages, most from my parents, but some from unknown numbers. I ignored them all and went to find coffee. When I returned, voices from Haley's room made me pause in the hallway. Absolutely devastated when we realized where she'd gone. My mother's voice, thick with what sounded like tears. We've been so worried. I froze, coffee forgotten in my hand. They were here. I pushed the door open to find my parents standing at Haley's bedside. My mother was dressed impeccably as always, not a hair out of place despite the supposedly emergency trip from Chicago. My father stood beside her in his customary business attire, hand resting possessively on the bed rail near Haley's arm. Haley herself was awake but silent, her body visibly tense, eyes wide with what I now recognized as fear. Cassandra, my mother turned to me, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. Thank God you're here. We've been so worried about both of you. The performance was flawless, concerned parents rushing to their daughter's bedside. But something had changed in me overnight. I could see the coldness behind my mother's tears, the calculation in my father's seemingly worried expression. "What are you doing here?" I asked, setting my coffee down and moving to Haley's other side, placing myself between her and our father. "What kind of question is that?" my father replied, affronted. "Our daughter is in the hospital 3 states away. Of course we came immediately. After telling me not to help her? After calling her a cripple?" I challenged. My mother's face shifted subtly, the concerned expression faltering for just a moment. "I was upset, Cassandra. You know how Haley can be. She's been increasingly paranoid lately, accusing us of terrible things." I pulled out my phone, opened the text messages. "Should I read these to the doctor?" "To the police officer who took my statement last night." My father stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Put that away. This is a family matter, not something for strangers to get involved in." It stopped being just a family matter when Haley showed up at my door malnourished and drugged, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You have no idea what we've been dealing with," my mother hissed, the facade of tears evaporating. "The constant demands, the attention-seeking, the manipulation. She's been tearing our family apart for years with her so-called disability." Haley flinched at her words, but remained silent, eyes darting between us. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell?" A new voice entered the conversation as Dr. Evans stepped into the room, accompanied by a different nurse. "I'm Dr. Evans, your daughter's attending physician." My parents immediately pivoted, composing their features into masks of parental concern. "Doctor, thank you so much for taking care of our Haley," my mother said warmly. "We've been beside ourselves with worry. When will she be able to travel back home with us? We want to get her back to her regular doctors in Chicago. Dr." Evans glanced at me, then at Haley, whose heart rate monitor had begun beeping more rapidly. "Actually, I'd like to discuss Haley's treatment plan privately with you," he said to my parents. "Perhaps we could step into the consultation room?" "Of course," my father agreed smoothly. "Cassandra, you'll stay with Haley?" It wasn't really a question, but I nodded anyway. As they followed Dr. Evans out, my father turned back to give me a warning look that I recognized from childhood. The one that said there would be consequences for defiance. Once they were gone, Haley grabbed my hand. "They're going to try to take me back," she whispered urgently. "Dad has power of attorney. He made me sign it last year when I was on heavy painkillers after a procedure. They're not taking you anywhere, I promised, though I wasn't sure how I could stop them legally." 20 minutes later, raised voices in the hallway drew my attention. I stepped out to see my parents confronting Dr. Evans, my father's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous," he was saying, voice elevated but controlled, always careful about public appearances. "We're her parents and legal guardians. You have no right to restrict our access." "Mr. Mitchell, as I explained, the hospital has protocols for cases where there are concerns about patient safety," Dr. Evans replied calmly. "What concerns?" my mother interjected. "Based on the paranoid ramblings of a mentally unstable girl and her gullible sister, we're consulting our attorney." "That's your right," Dr. Evans acknowledged. "But until this is resolved, I'm afraid I must ask you to respect the temporary restriction. Hospital security has been notified." As if on cue, 2 security officers appeared at the end of the hallway. My father, ever conscious of public scenes, immediately modulated his tone. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Dr. Evans. Then, noticing me, he added, "Cassandra, a word." I shook my head. "I'm staying with Haley." My mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "You ungrateful little fool. You have no idea what you're doing. When this blows up in your face, and it will, don't come crying to us." They left without another word, the security officers watching until they entered the elevator. Dr. Evans turned to me with a sympathetic expression. "Your sister's social worker has filed for an emergency protective order based on the medical evidence and your statement to police. It's temporary, but it should keep them away for now." I thanked him, relief washing over me, but it was short-lived. By afternoon, the real fallout began. My phone rang with a number I recognized: my Aunt Julia, my mother's sister. "Cassandra, "What on earth is going on?" she demanded when I answered. "Your mother is absolutely distraught. She says Haley ran away and is making horrible accusations." "Aunt Julia, it's not what they're telling you," I started, but she cut me off. "They told me Haley's been having delusions, that she's been refusing her medication for her bipolar disorder. They've been at their wits' end trying to help her." I felt like I'd been slapped. Bipolar disorder? Haley doesn't have bipolar disorder. She has chronic pain from her car accident. "That's not what your mother told me," Aunt Julia said, hesitation creeping into her voice. "She said Haley's been using drugs, that she's become paranoid and delusional." The pieces clicked into place. They've been lying to the whole family, haven't they? Making everyone think Haley is mentally ill or an addict instead of physically disabled. The silence on the other end was confirmation enough. After hanging up, I checked my email and found a message from my boss marked urgent. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "Cassandra, I received a concerning call from your father this morning. He says you're having some sort of breakdown and have taken your mentally ill sister from her caretakers. He mentioned you might need extended leave or even residential treatment. I'm worried about you. Please call me ASAP." I stared at the screen in disbelief. They were already making good on their threats, attempting to destroy my professional credibility. A quick check of social media showed several mutual family friends had posted vague prayers for the Mitchell family during this difficult time, messages, the kind that generated concern without specific details. The systematic dismantling of my life had begun, just as my father promised. But when I returned to Haley's room and saw her sleeping peacefully, perhaps truly safe for the first time in years, I knew I couldn't back down, regardless of what it cost me. The following day, Haley was strong enough to have a longer conversation with me and Maya, the social worker. The hospital room felt like neutral ground, a safe space where Haley could finally speak her truth without fear of retribution. "It started getting really bad about 2 years ago," Haley explained, her voice stronger though still raspy. "After I was denied disability benefits for the second time." "Your parents didn't support your application?" Maya asked, though we all knew the answer. Haley gave a bitter laugh. "Support it? They sabotaged it. Dad told the evaluator I had a history of exaggeration, and Mom, using her nursing background, suggested my symptoms were psychosomatic." I felt sick imagining my parents actively working against Haley receiving help she desperately needed. After that, they said since I couldn't support myself and refused to get better, I had to follow their rules completely. They controlled everything: my food, my medication, who I could talk to. Maya nodded, taking notes. "Were you allowed to see doctors independently?" "Never. Mom or Dad was always in the room. If I tried to speak to a doctor alone, they'd tell the doctor I was paranoid and needed supervision. When I started getting worse from the wrong medications, they told everyone I was becoming mentally unstable." "How did you figure out they were giving you the wrong medications?" I asked. Haley's eyes met mine. "I got suspicious when my symptoms kept getting worse instead of better. One night about 6 months ago, I pretended to swallow my pills, but kept them under my tongue. Later I looked them up online. One was an antipsychotic, one was a strong sedative, and one was supposedly for nerve pain, but at a dose way higher than recommended." She reached for the small backpack I'd brought from my apartment, which now sat on her bedside table. "I need to show you something." From a hidden pocket in the lining, she pulled out a small notebook with a worn cover. I started documenting everything. At first, just for myself, to make sure I wasn't actually losing my mind like they said. Then later, as evidence if I ever managed to escape. She handed me the journal. Inside were dated entries in Haley's familiar handwriting, documenting daily medications, symptoms, conversations, and incidents. There were careful notes about which pills were which, descriptions of side effects, and times when she believed medication had been added to her food. Most disturbing were the detailed accounts of emotional and psychological abuse. April 17th, Mom told Dr. Phillips I've been making up new symptoms. When I tried to describe the numbness in my legs, she interrupted to say I'd been watching medical shows and adopting symptoms I saw. Dr. P prescribed anxiety medication instead of running the tests I asked for. May 23rd. Dad took my phone away after catching me texting my old roommate Katie. Said I was spreading lies about my treatment. No outside contact allowed for 2 weeks as punishment. June 8th. Tried to eat less of the dinner I suspected was medicated. Mom forced me to finish everything, stood over me until I swallowed every bite. Felt dizzy and confused within 30 minutes. Slept for 14 hours. Page after page documented a systematic campaign to isolate Haley, discredit her, and control her through medication and psychological manipulation. There's more, Haley said quietly, taking the journal back and removing several folded papers from the back cover. She handed them to Maya. Photos I managed to take of the pills they were giving me, alongside printouts of what they actually look like from medical websites. And screenshots of text messages between Mom and Dad that I found when Mom left her phone unlocked. Maya unfolded the papers, and I leaned over to see. The evidence was damning. The text messages between our parents were particularly chilling. Increased H's sedative dosage. Should keep her compliant for the disability home visit tomorrow. Mom, make sure she doesn't talk to the evaluator alone. Remember what happened last time. Dad, don't worry. She'll be too groggy to cause problems. If necessary, I'll tell them her mental state requires my presence as a medical professional. Mom, and most disturbing, we need to discuss long-term solutions. She's becoming too aware, hiding pills. Residential facility might be our best option. Found one in Wisconsin that takes difficult cases. Insurance would cover if we get the right diagnosis. Dad, the specialist I talked to suggested we could make a case for involuntary commitment if we document enough delusional episodes. Keep track of everything you can use. Mom, I had to step away, ball rising in my throat. These were my parents, the same people who had attended my school plays, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had seemed strict but loving throughout my childhood. How could I have been so blind to who they really were? Cassandra, Haley called softly. I don't blame you for not knowing. They were careful to keep the worst of it hidden from everyone. I returned to her bedside, tears streaming down my face. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I abandoned you. They fooled everyone, Haley insisted. My doctors, our family, even me sometimes. I started to believe I really was crazy, that the pain was in my head. They're expert manipulators. Maya reviewed the evidence carefully. This appears to be a clear case of medical abuse and potential financial exploitation. Haley, did your parents have access to your finances? Haley nodded. They controlled everything. Dad set up a joint account when I moved back home after the accident. My disability checks went straight there. Disability checks? I asked, confused. I thought you were denied benefits. I was initially, Haley explained. But I reapplied with help from a patient advocate I met at physical therapy. I was approved about a year ago. Dad said he was managing the money for me, saving it for when I really needed it. I never saw any of it. Maya made a note. We'll need to look into potential financial abuse as well. This could strengthen the case for a more permanent protective order. The weight of the decision before me was immense. Supporting an investigation against my own parents could mean permanent estrangement, professional consequences, and potential financial hardship. They had already begun their campaign to discredit me, and my father had the connections to make his threats reality. But looking at Haley, my little sister who had endured years of abuse while I looked the other way, I knew there was only one choice I could make. What do you need from me? I asked Maya. Your formal statement supporting the investigation would be most helpful, she replied. Also, Haley will need a safe place to recover once she's discharged. She can't return to your parents' home. She'll stay with me, I said without hesitation. I'll make whatever arrangements are necessary. Later that afternoon, Officer Ramirez returned to take my official statement. I provided copies of the text messages, described my parents' behavior at the hospital, and confirmed my willingness to testify if needed. As I signed the statement, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the family I thought I had, relief for finally standing on the right side. The hospital legal department informed us that my parents had contacted their attorney, who was arguing that Haley was mentally incompetent and that my father should retain medical decision-making authority as her power of attorney. We filed an emergency petition to have the power of attorney temporarily suspended based on the evidence of potential abuse, the hospital's patient advocate explained. The judge granted a temporary restraining order preventing your parents from making medical decisions or having contact with Haley until the hearing next week. It was a small victory, but an important one. That night, as Haley slept, I sat by her window watching the Boston skyline glitter in the darkness. My phone contained dozens of missed calls and messages from family members and friends, many of them clearly influenced by whatever story my parents were spreading. I scrolled through them, noting who was asking questions and who had already taken sides. My cousin Michael had sent a simple text, "I don't know what's happening, but I'm here if you need to talk." My childhood friend Stephanie was less open-minded. "How could you accuse your parents of such terrible things? They've always been so good to you girls." The division was beginning, just as I'd feared. But with each piece of evidence, each medical confirmation of Haley's mistreatment, my resolve strengthened. Some relationships were worth sacrificing to protect what truly mattered. As I watched my sister's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, perhaps the first truly safe sleep she'd had in years, I knew I had made the right choice. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of medical appointments, legal consultations, and preparations for Haley's discharge. I took emergency family leave from work, grateful that my immediate supervisor believed me despite my parents' attempts to undermine my credibility. "Take the time you need," Roger had told me after I explained the situation. "Your sister comes first. The team can handle the Henderson project." Haley was released to my care on a crisp Tuesday morning. The drive to my apartment was quiet, Haley gazing out the window at the Boston streets, as if seeing freedom for the first time. "It's weird," she said finally, "to go somewhere without having to ask permission or worry about punishment." My heart broke a little more at her words. We had a long road ahead of us. The first specialist appointment came 2 days later. Dr. Krishnan, a rheumatologist specializing in chronic pain conditions, spent nearly 2 hours with Haley, reviewing her medical history and conducting a thorough examination. "Your original diagnosis was correct," she confirmed, her kind eyes meeting Haley's. "You have chronic pain syndrome resulting from your accident, complicated by some nerve damage that wasn't properly addressed at the time. The good news is, there are treatments that can help manage your symptoms effectively." Haley started to cry, years of being told her pain wasn't real finally countered by professional validation. "The bad news, Dr. Krishnan continued gently, is that some of the inappropriate medications you were given may have worsened certain aspects of your condition. And the malnutrition certainly didn't help. But," she added with determination, "we can work with that. It's not too late to improve your quality of life significantly." For the first time in years, Haley had a proper treatment plan created by doctors who believed her. Physical therapy twice weekly. Appropriate pain management with non-addictive medications. Nutritional counseling to address the malnutrition. Trauma therapy to process the psychological abuse. While Haley focused on her health, I handled the practical and legal aspects of our new reality. My one-bedroom apartment wasn't ideal for 2 people, especially with Haley's mobility issues. I rearranged furniture, installed grab bars in the bathroom, and researched accessibility options we could implement without violating my lease agreement. The financial strain was considerable. My savings were quickly depleted by medical copays, legal consultations, and additional household expenses. The irony wasn't lost on me that somewhere in Chicago, my father was likely controlling a bank account with Haley's disability payments, money that should have been supporting her care all along. The legal process moved forward in both Massachusetts and Illinois. A court date was set to determine whether criminal charges would be filed against our parents. The temporary restraining order was extended, and our parents' attempts to have Haley declared incompetent were rejected based on evaluations from her new medical team. Throughout it all, the family fracture widened. Some relatives, like Aunt Julia, initially sided with our parents, but became uncertain as more evidence emerged. Others, particularly on my father's side, closed ranks around them without question. Childhood friends took sides, social media became a battlefield, and my parents' campaign to discredit us grew increasingly desperate. "They're saying I kidnapped you," I told Haley one evening as we ate takeout on my small balcony. Dad's friend at the Chicago Tribune ran a story about mental health advocacy that basically painted them as martyrs dealing with a troubled daughter. Haley pushed her food around her plate. "Are you sorry?" "For helping me, I mean. Your life was perfect before I showed up." I set down my fork and took her hand. "My life wasn't perfect, Haley. It was built on lies and complicity. I'm not sorry for a second, not 1 second, that you came to me." A week later, we received an unexpected ally. Dr. Lawrence, a neurologist who had treated Haley briefly after her accident, contacted Haley's new medical team. "I always had concerns about your parents' involvement in your care," he admitted during a conference call. "They would interrupt you during appointments, answer questions directed to you, and seemed overly insistent on certain medications while rejecting others. I made notes in your file, but when I suggested you come alone to your next appointment, they never brought you back." His testimony strengthened the case against our parents substantially. The hardest moments came at night, when the apartment was quiet and the weight of everything settled upon us. Haley still had nightmares, often waking in panic, unsure of where she was. I would sit with her, reminding her she was safe, that no one could force pills down her throat or lock her in her room anymore. And I had my own demons to face, guilt that threatened to consume me in unguarded moments. How had I not seen what was happening? How had I accepted our parents' explanations so easily? How many times had Haley tried to reach out to me in coded ways that I had missed? "We need to talk about the hearing next week," I said to Haley one morning as she did her physical therapy exercises in the living room. "They'll be there, and you'll have to see them for the first time since the hospital. Are you ready for that?" Haley's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her resistance band. "I don't know," she admitted. "The thought of being in the same room with them makes me feel like I can't breathe. What if I freeze? What if I can't tell my story?" I knelt beside her exercise mat. "You won't be alone. I'll be there, Maya will be there, our attorney will be there. And Haley," I squeezed her shoulder gently, "you're the strongest person I know. You survived years of what they did to you. You can survive telling your truth for a few hours." Her eyes met mine, fear gradually giving way to determination. "Promise you won't leave me alone with them?" "Not even for a minute." "I promise," I said. "You're not facing them alone this time. Or ever again," I silently added. 6 months after that terrifying night when Haley collapsed at my door, we sat together on the newly installed window seat in our apartment. Yes, our apartment now, as we decided to make the living arrangement permanent. Boston spring brought a gentle breeze through the open window, carrying the scent of blooming trees from the park across the street. Haley looked different now, still thin, but healthfully so, her face filled out with proper nutrition. Her hair had regained its auburn shine, and though she still used a cane most days, her physical therapist was pleased with her progress. The proper treatment plan had made a world of difference. "I got accepted," she said, passing me her tablet, which displayed an email from the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. "Online program in graphic design. I can study at my own pace, working around my good and bad days." "Haley, that's amazing." I hugged her carefully, mindful of her still tender points. "We should celebrate tonight." My own career had recovered from the initial damage our parents attempted to inflict. After a brief leave of absence, I returned to the design agency with my supervisor's full support. I'd even expanded my professional focus to include accessibility design and had recently completed a project for a disability advocacy organization. The legal matters had been resolved with less drama than we'd feared. Our parents received 3 years of probation and mandatory counseling rather than jail time, a result Haley and I had actually advocated for. As she wisely pointed out, seeing them punished wasn't as important as ensuring they couldn't hurt her anymore. A permanent restraining order prevented them from contacting either of us. The financial investigation resulted in the recovery of most of Haley's disability payments, which had indeed been diverted to an account under our father's control. The court appointed an independent trustee to manage the back pay until Haley felt ready to take control of her finances. We'd made the difficult decision to limit contact with extended family rather than force relatives to choose sides. Some, like Aunt Julia, had come around after seeing the evidence and now checked in regularly. Others remained firmly in our parents' camp, convinced that Haley was mentally unstable and I had been manipulated. We had learned to let go of the need for universal understanding or validation. Therapy had been essential for both of us, individual sessions for our specific traumas and occasional joint sessions to rebuild our sisterly relationship. We were learning to communicate honestly, to recognize the manipulation tactics we'd both internalized from our upbringing, and to establish healthy boundaries with each other and the world. Do you ever miss them? Haley asked suddenly, her eyes on the distance outside our window. Mom and Dad, I mean. I considered the question carefully. I miss who I thought they were, I answered honestly. I miss the idea of having parents who truly loved us. But the real them? No, I don't miss the real them at all. Haley nodded. Sometimes I have these dreams where Mom is kind, where she believes me about the pain and helps instead of hurts. I wake up crying, missing this mother who never actually existed. I took her hand. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Grieving people who are still alive but were never who we needed them to be. The therapist says that's normal, Haley replied. Grief for the family we deserved but never had. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching pedestrians pass by on the street below, each wrapped in their own life stories, their own invisible battles. You know what still amazes me? Haley said finally. How easily manipulation can hide abuse in supposedly respectable families. Everyone thought our parents were these great people, Dad the successful attorney, Mom the former nurse who gave up her career for her children. Their house was always perfect when people visited. They donated to charities, went to church, did everything right on the surface. People believe what's comfortable to believe, I said. It's easier to think a young woman is exaggerating her pain than to accept that her parents are systematically drugging her. It's easier to dismiss invisible disabilities than to accommodate them. Being believed is the first step to healing, Haley murmured, echoing a phrase from her support group. When you believed me that night, you saved my life. Literally and figuratively. The weight of that truth settled between us, how close we had come to a very different outcome. If I had listened to our mother's text, if I had sent Haley away or returned her to our parents' care, she might not have survived. The medical reports had made that devastatingly clear. I'm thinking about starting a blog, Haley said, changing the subject. About chronic illness, invisible disabilities, and medical gaslighting. So many people in my support group have similar stories, not as extreme as mine, but the same patterns of not being believed, being told it's all in their head. I think that's a fantastic idea, I encouraged her. Your voice matters, and your experience could help others recognize warning signs earlier than we did. As evening fell, casting long shadows across our living room, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed in half a year. The family we were born into had shattered beyond repair, but in its place, we were building something stronger, a chosen family based on truth, respect, and genuine love rather than control and appearances. Family, I had learned, wasn't defined by blood, but by who stood beside you when standing was hardest. It was defined by those who believed your truth even when doubting would be easier. It was about support without strings, love without conditions. For those watching who might be in situations similar to what Haley endured, or who suspect someone they know might be suffering in silence, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it often is. Invisible pain is still real pain. Invisible abuse is still real abuse. And help is available, even when it seems like the whole world is aligned against you. If this story resonated with you, please share it to help others recognize the signs of medical abuse and gaslighting. Drop a comment if you or someone you know has experienced dismissal of chronic pain or invisible disabilities. Your story matters and deserves to be heard. Subscribe to join our community of survivors and allies working to bring these hidden struggles into the light. And remember, the most important thing you can say to someone who's suffering is simply, "I believe you." Thank you for listening to our story. May you find the strength to seek or offer help when it's needed most, and the wisdom to know that family is defined by love, not obligation.